Pretend I'm your wife and dance, she breathed. Someone is watching you. Zora Havlin had folded coats at the Hotel Varenne for 22 nights when she closed her hand around the wrist of the most feared man in Vienna and drew him out onto the ballroom floor to keep him breathing. She had not planned to touch him. Nobody touched Casimir Dragunov. The whole hotel bent into small avoidances around him, waiters retreating, the concierge dropping his voice at the Dragunov name. Zora took their coats. But she had been standing at the rim of the floor with a tray of returned wraps when she noticed the man at the fourth mirror, and something older than her wages moved her feet. The man was not dancing, not drinking. He held a full glass he never raised, and his weight sat wrong, rocked back on his heels, the stance of someone waiting to move. His gaze tracked Casimir across the room, and each time Casimir turned, the man's fingers drifted toward his lapel and stopped. Zora knew that stillness. 11 years she had read bodies for a living. A partner's decision arriving through the contact before his feet caught up. The man at the fourth mirror was measuring Casimir the way a dancer measures the bar before he steps. And Casimir, alone and motionless at the head of the room, was the simplest target in it. So she set down the tray, crossed the floor she had sworn never to touch again, and slid her hand into the grip of the most dangerous man in Vienna before the fear could reach her fingers. Pretend I'm your wife and dance, she breathed. Fourth mirror. Don't look. For a long moment he did not move, and she understood she might die for this. His eyes traveled her face as if pricing it. His hand was a stone. Then the orchestra tipped into a waltz, and her body did the one thing it still knew without asking permission. She lifted the frame and left the space open, never pulling, only offering a shape, and something beneath his stillness stepped into it. His palm found her back, his feet found the beat, and the terror of Vienna began, stiffly, to waltz with the coat girl. Keep turning, she murmured against his collar. A man standing still is a target. A man dancing is furniture. No one shoots furniture. On the next rotation she set a column between him and the mirror, and the watcher lost his line of sight. Nandor, Casimir said. So low she felt it more than heard it. Fourth mirror, gray collar. She saw no signal, but a door opened behind her, and when the turn brought the mirror back, the gray-collared man was gone, and two of Casimir's people were walking, unhurried, after him. The waltz ended. He did not release her hand. You will give me your name, he said. Across the room, in the gilt doorway, a woman in oyster silk watched them with a face like a shutting door, and half hidden against the frame stood a small girl in dark blue, staring at Zora as though a ghost had walked out of the wall. Zora slipped free and vanished into the crowd before he could stop her. By the time she reached the cloakroom, her hands had begun to shake. They always did this. After, never during. When someone stood in danger, her body went still as a held breath. Only when it passed, and she remembered people had been watching, did her fingers turn to thread. She gripped the counter and waited it out. There you are. Frau Obrist filled the doorway, arms folded. She ran the Varennes staff the way a boarder is run, and had missed nothing. You left your post. You put your hands on Herr Dragunov. The name dropped into the little room like a cracked glass. I can explain, Zora said, and could not. I read a man's balance and decided he was an assassin. So I hauled the head of the Dragunov family onto a dance floor was not a sentence that ended in keeping her job. You had better hope you never have to. Frau Obrist studied her, and something like pity crossed her face. 22 days. No references, no history you'll speak of, a way of going still when a man raises his voice. And I hired you anyway, because you work harder than anyone here. Whatever that was, it does not happen twice. She left. Zora let out a breath, and the oyster silk woman came in. Everyone knew Adeline Draxler by sight. The family that had shaken hands with the Dragonovs since before Zora was born, a woman who entered every room certain she was already its future. "So you're the coat girl." Her gaze moved over Zora's plain uniform, her scuffed flats, and her hands. "You dance. A little." Men like Casimir Dragonov collect curious things for a season. A coat girl who can waltz. Then the novelty thins. The thing goes back in its cage, and the man marries the woman his family chose for him. She smiled, and the smile was the cruel part, because it was almost kind. "You're the bird, I'm the marriage. Try not to break your neck on the glass on the way down." And it was not Adeline's voice now, but Miran's, climbing through the stranger's mouth the way it always found a way in. "You're a decoration, Zora. Lovely on my arm and useless off it. The moment I stop aiming the light at you, you disappear." Her hands were shaking again. "Careful," Adeline said, watching them. "You'll drop something." Zora dropped nothing. But she did not answer, and Adeline took the silence for a victory and carried it out. The next morning, Frau Obrist came to find her wearing an expression Zora had never seen on her. "Herr Dragonov is asking for you, not the manager. You, by name." She paused. "How does Casimir Dragonov know your name, Zora?" She had no answer. She followed the older woman up the service stairs, her heart going hard. And at the top, in the corridor beyond a set of doors she had never been allowed through, stood the small girl in dark blue. The child looked at her and took one step forward, and a woman in a nurse's uniform gasped as if the ceiling had split. "She moved." The nurse said it twice, staring. "She moved toward you. She hasn't crossed a room for anyone in 11 months. Zora understood only what the child's body told her. The pinned shoulders, the chin tucked as if expecting the worst, the eyes tracking every adult hand. Not shyness. A child who had learned the world moved without warning and always toward her, and had made herself small and quiet so it might, now and then, forget she was there. Zora knew that shape. She had worn it herself once, in a kitchen in Prague, holding a broken cup. So she did not crouch and coo. She did not reach. She did the one thing every adult in that corridor had failed to do. She stopped. She stood still, hands loose and open, and looked gently past the child's shoulder, the way you look near a frightened animal to tell it you are not a threat. The child took a second step. "That's enough." The voice came from the doorway, and the corridor rearranged itself around it. Casimir Dragonov filled the frame in a charcoal suit, and every set of eyes in the hall found something else to look at. The child shrank against the wall the instant he spoke. Not from fear of him, Zora saw, but from the sheer weight of the attention that came with him. "Leave us," he said, and the nurse fled. He looked at Zora a long moment. "You know who I am." "Yes." "And still you put your hands on me in a room full of my enemies and told me what to do. You were about to be shot. And standing still." Something shifted behind his eyes. "How did you know he meant harm?" "My people questioned him for 3 hours. He carried a weapon and a photograph of my car, and 4 of them walked past and saw a guest. You looked once, across a ballroom, and knew." He stepped closer. "Convince me you did not send him." The threat was real, and her hands should have been shaking and were not, because this was a thing that needed doing, and her hands never failed her then. "You want to know how I knew." She lifted her hand flat between them. "Gimme yours. I won't hurt you." A muscle moved in his jaw, but after a moment he laid his palm to hers. "Now push. Don't tell me when. Just decide, and push." He pushed. She was already folding away with it before his weight arrived, so his force meant nothing. "I felt you decide before you moved. In the tendons here." She touched his wrist. For 11 years I danced with a partner who used the frame to control me. You learn to read a man's intention through his hand a half-second before his body catches up. And that half-second is the difference between a turn and a fall. The man at the mirror had it in him. He was not watching you. He was waiting to move toward you. My whole body knows the difference even when I can't say why. She let his hand go. I didn't send him. I've only spent my life learning to feel the exact thing he was about to do. The silence stretched. Then, at knee height, a small hand closed around two of Casimir's fingers. The child had crossed the room again. To him this time, tugging with tiny insistence, pulling his hand toward Zora. She could not speak. But she could pull, and she pulled her uncle toward the coat girl with everything a 6-year-old had. Casimir went utterly still, staring at the small hand on his fingers as though it were the only thing that had ever frightened him. Her name is Runa, he said quietly, my brother's daughter. She has not spoken a word in 11 months. The finest doctors in Europe have sat with her and failed. He looked up, and the cold was gone, and what lay beneath was worse. A raw, exhausted hope he hated himself for feeling. And she has crossed a room for you twice in 5 minutes. He was not a man who asked. She could see what it cost him. Stay, he said. Whatever the cloakroom pays, I will triple it. Stay and reach her. The room they had built for Runa was a nursery made by people who had confused expense with comfort. Zora stood in the doorway the next morning and understood in a single glance why 11 months of specialists had failed. Everything in it had been arranged to draw the child out. Toys set at inviting angles, a little table laid for a tea that no one attended. Every object an outstretched adult hand saying, "Come here, come to us, be the child we need you to be." And in the corner, folded into the narrow gap between the wardrobe and the wall, in the one place nothing reached for her, sat Runa. "You've been trying to bring her out," Zora said. Behind her, Casimir and the nurse and Frau Obrist waited in the corridor. "Of course," the nurse said. "We coax her. We offer her things. Every method? Everyone in her life has spent 11 months reaching for her." Zora kept her voice low. "So the safest place in the world has become the one corner no hand can get to." She turned. "I need the room empty. Only me. The door's open. She has to see the way out. Always. No one watching from the hall. And I need the old practice room on the 4th floor unlocked. The one with the mirrors and the sprung floor." Casimir's jaw set. "You are not taking her out of my sight. I'm not taking her anywhere. She won't leave that corner today. Perhaps not this week." She met his eyes. "You asked me to reach her. This is how I reach. I don't begin in the place that hurts." He studied her, and then did the hardest thing she would see him do in those early days. He stepped back, took his terrible weight of attention out of the room, and let the door stand open behind him. Zora did not go to Runa. She went to the far side of the nursery, as far from the child as the walls allowed, and sat down on the floor with her back to the wall. And for the first time in front of another living soul in 3 years, she began, very quietly, to dance. Not a performance. There was no room for one, sitting down. Only her hands and shoulders, tracing the shapes of an old, slow waltz in the air, the way a musician fingers a melody on a tabletop. She let her eyes go soft and unfocused. She hummed, under her breath, a simple 4-note figure and the count of a box step. The first thing Miran had ever taught her, before he learned that the surest way to keep her was to make her afraid. She had hated those 4 notes for years. Here, in the morning light, they came back to her clean. She did not look at Runa. She traced the waltz and hummed, and after a while she noticed, without letting herself notice, that the child's foot, poking from the gap, had begun to move. Only the toe, tapping. 1, 2, 3. Zora's throat tightened. She kept humming. She did not react. Reacting was a hand reaching, and hands that reached got nothing. An hour passed. She traced shapes in the air and murmured to the empty room, the way she might once have soothed a frightened animal, that the practice room upstairs had a warped board that clicked. Runa listened as though memorizing instructions. By the third day, the child had moved from the gap to the open edge of the wardrobe. By the fifth, she sat in the middle of the floor, 6 feet away, watching Zora's hands. On the seventh day, Zora stood up. She rose slowly, the way you rise near a deer, and lifted her arms into a full frame, holding an invisible partner she had held 10,000 times. And alone, in the sunlit nursery, she began to waltz. Turn and rise and fall. She kept her gaze on the middle distance, on anything but the child. Because she knew that the instant she looked at Runa and made it a thing the child was meant to do, the child would vanish back into the wall. So she danced alone and left the frame open. A shape offered, never imposed. You never pull a partner. You make the space, and you wait. And on the far side of the room, Runa stood up. Zora's heart slammed. She did not stop. She turned again, drifting a half-step nearer, arms still curved around the empty space, humming the 4 notes, saying with every line of her body, "I am not reaching for you. I am only here. The door is open. You can say no." Runa took a step, then another, and into the open frame of Zora's arms where a partner would stand, the child laid one small hand flat against Zora's palm. Zora stopped humming. The whole world shrank to 4 ounces of pressure against her hand. "There you are," she whispered, not looking down, still gazing at the middle distance. "Do you feel that? That's the frame. As long as we hold it, I can't pull you anywhere you don't want to go, and you can't fall. It's a promise 2 people make with their hands." She swayed, a suggestion of a box step, and felt the child sway with her. 1, 2, 3. You can say no to any of it. You just did the hardest part. Runa's other hand came up and gripped Zora's sleeve. They swayed together in the light, the silent child and the woman who could not dance in front of anyone. And Zora, who had promised herself she would never weep at work, let the tears come, because the child could not see her face. That was when she heard the sound from the doorway. She had told him not to watch. He had not been able to help it. Casimir Draganov stood in the open door where she had told no one to stand, one hand pressed flat over his mouth, his eyes wet, watching his brother's daughter dance for the first time in 11 months, as though he were watching the dead walk back into the room. He saw her see him. Neither of them moved. Then Runa, feeling the shift in the air, turned her head, saw her uncle in the doorway, and instead of fleeing to the wall, kept her hand in Zora's and lifted the other toward him. 2 people now, she was pulling into the frame. Casimir crossed the room like a man walking to an altar and lowered himself to his knees beside them. He did not seize the child, did not crush her against him the way every line of his body was plainly screaming to. He put out his open palm. He waited. He let her choose. Runa put her hand in his. "There," Zora whispered, over the child's dark head, to the man kneeling across from her with tears cutting down a face the whole city feared. "You see? You never pull them. You hold the frame, and you wait, and you let them come." He looked at her as if she had handed him something he had stopped believing existed. 5 more minutes, he said hoarsely. A plea and a joke at once, a man asking a child for time. "Can we have 5 more minutes?" Runa did not answer in words, but she did not let go of either hand. They stayed on the floor for an hour. The trouble began when Zora tried to go home. At the end of that first week, when the hour on the floor was over, she gathered her coat and told Runa gently that she would come back in the morning. And the child, who had not spoken in 11 months, made a sound. Not a word. A high, thin, wordless cry. The sound of a small creature watching the one safe thing in the world walk toward a door. Runa crossed the nursery at a run, wrapped both arms around Zora's leg, pressed her face to her knee, and would not be pried loose. The nurse tried. Runa screamed without words. Frau Obrist tried, with the brisk competence that ran the whole hotel, and the child only gripped harder and screamed higher. A grief so terrible, so far past what a 6-year-old should have the body to hold, that even Frau Obrist stepped back with a hand at her throat. Runa. Casimir spoke from the door. The child flinched at the weight of his voice but did not let go. He crouched and spoke to her low and steady, and still the small arms stayed locked around Zora's leg. He looked up. She thinks if you leave, you will not come back. Children who have lost people always think that, Zora said quietly. Because once, it was true. She knelt, not peeling the child off, but lowering herself into the grip, so that Runa was holding her rather than restraining her, so the same clutch became an embrace. Runa, listen to my hands. She took the small hands and pressed them flat. The frame, the promise. This doesn't break when I walk to the door. I am going to go and sleep, and drink terrible coffee, and come back before you wake. That isn't me leaving. That's me going, and coming back. Which is a different thing, and I will prove it to you every single morning until you believe me. Runa did not believe her. Runa's fingers stayed knotted in her sleeve. Casimir watched this, and Zora saw him arrive at a decision. Stay in the hotel tonight, he said. There's a suite. Anything you need? No. She said it gently, but she said it. If I sleep down the hall, she learns I only stay when she screams. She has to learn the other thing, that I leave, and the world does not end, and I come back anyway. She looked at the child. But not tonight. Tonight is too soon. Tonight I'll stay until she sleeps, and then I'll go. And in the morning I'll be the first face she sees, and we'll do it again, a little further, the next day, and the next. It took 2 hours for Runa to fall asleep, with her hand fisted in Zora's collar. When Zora finally eased free and slipped into the corridor, past midnight, Casimir Draganov was waiting against the wall with his tie loosened and his coat off, looking less like a man the city feared than like someone who had forgotten how to go to bed. I'll have a car take you home, he said. It's 4 streets. I walk. It's midnight. Someone tried to kill me a week ago, and you were dancing in the middle of it. Humor me. 1 car, 1 driver. Something almost wry crossed his face. You are the most stubborn woman I have ever employed, and I employ men who have survived being shot. She let him win the car. It was a small enough thing, but she did not want the night to end on a curb. And so, before the driver pulled away, she said the thing she should not have said. She'll test you, tomorrow or the day after. She'll break something good on purpose to find out whether you'll take the safety back. When she does, don't grab. Hold the frame, wait. Casimir looked at her a moment in the dark of the car. You know a great deal about how frightened things test the people who help them. Yes. How? She did not answer. She went up the 4 flights, let herself in with the one key on earth that belonged to no one but her, stood in the dark of the only room that was hers, pressed her back to the door, and breathed. Down in the street, the car did not pull away for a long time. He came the next evening under the pretext of Runa's schedule. He came the evening after that under the pretext of the doctor's reports, and the one after that with no pretext he bothered to name. And by the end of the 2nd week, the pretexts had fallen away entirely, and he simply arrived at 7:30 to the 4th floor practice room where Zora had begun bringing Runa in the evenings. The one room in the Varenne that nobody used, with its wall of old spotted mirrors, its sprung wooden floor, and its warped board by the window that clicked, exactly as Zora had promised the child it would, every single time you stepped on it. There was a ritual to his arrival, that neither of them named. He would stop at the door and take something off. Not only the coat, though he took that too, but the other thing, the weight, the version of himself that made waiters step back. He would set his heavy signet ring on the windowsill beside the thermos and roll his cuffs to the forearm. And by the time he crossed to the middle of the floor, he was almost an ordinary man, a tall, tired man in his shirt sleeves who had come to watch a child learn a box step. And the change was so complete and so plainly a relief that Zora began to think of the practice room as the one place in the whole city where Casimir Dragonov was permitted to set himself down. The room became theirs. It belonged to the hotel, not to him, and so within its 4 mirrored walls the ordinary weight of him lifted. No guards came through the door. He left Nandor in the corridor, and Nandor, who had waited outside a great many doors, learned the shape of the 4-note tune well enough to hum it, badly, to himself. Inside, there was no one to perform Casimir Dragonov for, only the warped board, a child learning to hold a frame, and a woman who treated the most feared man in Vienna as though his name were simply a word. "You're gripping again," she told him one evening, 3 weeks in. He was holding Runa's hands, walking her through the slow box step the child now demanded every night, and his knuckles had gone white with the care of it. "I don't want her to fall. If you hold that tight, she can't tell where she ends and you begin, and she'll fight you." Zora stepped in behind him and, without quite deciding to, laid her hands over his to loosen them. And the instant she touched him, she felt the whole enormous stillness of him draw tight as a held breath, and understood that no one, perhaps in years, had touched this man without wanting something from him or being afraid of him. She kept her voice even. "Soft hands. You aren't stopping her from falling. You're giving her something to find her balance against. There's a difference. And the whole world lives inside it." She eased his grip open until his hands cupped rather than clamped. "You lead by offering, not by holding, even her, especially her." "That is not," Casimir said very quietly, "how I have led anything, ever, in my life. I know, I've met the results. Someone shot at them in a ballroom." The corner of his mouth moved. It was becoming a thing she watched for. That small, unwilling motion, the nearest he came to a laugh, a muscle relearning a shape it had forgotten. She learned him in pieces. With the ring off his finger, his hands looked like an ordinary man's, blunt and careful. He slept, by his own admission, perhaps 4 hours a night. He read every document twice, once for what it said and once for what it was hiding. He could not bear to sit with his back to a door, and always took the chair that faced the room. And underneath all of it was a person who had been alone so long that he had forgotten. Alone was a condition capable of changing, rather than simply the shape of the air. One evening, when Runa had fallen asleep on the folded coats in the corner, Zora put out her own hand and asked him to dance. He looked at it the way he might look at a loaded thing. "I don't dance." "You danced with me in a ballroom. You saved your own life doing it." "I moved where you put me. That is not the same." "No," she agreed. "It isn't. Come here." And when he took her hand, stiff and wary, she did something no one had done to Casimir Dragonov in his adult life. She made him follow. She took the lead, lifted the frame, offered the turns, asked his body to trust hers and go where it was sent, and she watched him hate it. Watched every instinct in him fight the surrender of it. Watched him try 3 times to take the lead back by force and fail, because she simply gave, and never once let the giving harden into a grip. "Stop steering," she murmured. "You're allowed to be carried. Nobody is going to take anything from you while you're being carried. That's the whole secret of it. Let go, and I promise not to let you fall." For 1 bar, then a second, she felt him let go. Felt the terror of Vienna hand her his weight, and trust her to keep it. It lasted only a moment before he stepped back, unsettled by himself, and called it enough. But she had seen the thing under the armor, the man who wanted more than anything to set the weight down and not be punished for it. "Someday," she said lightly, releasing him, "you'll let yourself be led for a whole song, and it won't cost you a thing." He did not answer, but he looked at her a beat too long, and she felt the look on her skin for an hour afterward. She discovered how hungry he was the evening she brought soup. She had been making it for herself in the little flat, and had carried the thermos up because Runa's lesson had run late, and the child liked it. Plain Czech potato soup, thick with marjoram and mushroom and nothing in it that cost money, the food of people who had none. She poured Runa a cup, and then, because it would have been strange not to, poured a second and held it out to Casimir, fully expecting the head of the Dragonov family to regard a paper cup of peasant soup as a small insult. He took it. He tasted it. He went completely still. "What is this?" he said. "Potato soup. It's what you eat when there's nothing to eat." She watched him drink the whole cup slowly, the way a man drinks who is trying not to be seen needing it. "My grandmother made it in a kitchen the size of that windowsill. It is the least expensive thing I know how to make." "It is the best thing I have eaten in a year," Casimir said, and looked faintly betrayed by his own voice for saying so. After that there was always a thermos. He never asked for it. She never mentioned it. It became one of the evening's facts, like the ring on the windowsill, like the small joys Runa was quietly accumulating. The click of the warped board, the 4 notes, the way the child had begun, without meaning to hum. The change in him did not stay inside the practice room, and other people saw it before Zora did. Frau Obrist stopped her on the service stairs one morning, ostensibly about the linens, and then said, with the studied carelessness of a woman who ran a whole hotel and missed nothing, "Herr Dragonov ate in the dining room on Thursday, with the child, in front of people." She let it sit. "He has not done that since his brother died. Whatever you are doing, girl, do not stop doing it." And Nandor, who never spoke to Zora at all, held a door for her one night and said only gruffly, "He laughs now. Twice this week I have heard it. I had begun to think the sound had died with the old family." Then, embarrassed, he went back to being a wall. But she could not stop him trying to pay for it. That was the war they fought quietly, all through those weeks. He could not stop reaching for the thing that would buy what was happening between the 3 of them, because buying was the only language of care he had ever been fluent in. He sent a car, she sent back, and walked. He had the broken radiator in her flat replaced without asking, and she paid him back to the last shilling, over every objection, until he gave up. He learned that she counted her coins at the market, and he learned about the old biscuit tin on her shelf with studio written across the lid in faded pencil, money, a little each week, for the thing she did not quite let herself say aloud. A small dance school. One day, for the people the grand floors forgot. Frightened children, stiff old widows, the ones the mirrors had always made feel like a mistake. "How much do you need?" he asked, the first evening he saw the tin. "For the studio. Give me the number." Zora put the tin back on the shelf. "Don't. I asked a number. And your face is already writing the check." She almost smiled. "That tin is the first thing in my adult life I have filled by myself, 1 coin at a time, with no name on it but mine. If you fill it, it stops being mine and becomes a thing you gave me. I have already lived a life where a man gave me everything and then held all of it over my head like a roof he could take away whenever I displeased him." She met his eyes. "I would rather have the empty tin. The empty tin is mine." Casimir was quiet a long moment. "The man who gave you everything," he said, "and then held it over you. Yes. He is the reason your hands shake when people watch. Yes. Does he have a name?" "Don't," she said again, softly. And this time he heard the whole of it, and, for perhaps the first time in his life, let a thing he badly wanted to go and break lie there unbroken because she had asked him to. She watched what it cost him. She watched him decide to pay it anyway. And something in her chest that she had believed was knotted shut for good came loose by a single thread. His own world did not vanish during those weeks. It only waited at the edges. Sometimes his phone would buzz, and he would cross to the window and take the call with his back to the room, his voice dropping into a flat, cold, foreign register, a voice that decided things about people who were not there. And Zora would keep dancing with Runa and pretend not to hear the border he stood on. When he turned back, the other voice was gone, folded away, and he became the man who watched a child dance. She never asked what the calls were. He never told her. There was a line drawn down the middle of his life, and she had decided she could live beside it, so long as it never once crossed the threshold of the room where the child was. That was the evening he first said the words at her door. He had walked her the 4 streets home, no car, no driver, only the two of them and the emptied city and the cold coming up off the river. And at the foot of her stairs, where any other man of his kind would simply have climbed them as though the space were already his, Casimir Dragonov stopped. "May I come in?" he said. It was such a small sentence. It very nearly took her legs out from under her. Miron had never once asked. Miron had owned every room the instant he stepped into it. Even after she had left him, he had used his copy of her key to walk into her flat and take the coffee grinder, because he had paid for it, because everything she owned had always been on loan and he was calling it in. No man had ever stood at the bottom of her stairs, made himself smaller than the door, and asked. "Yes," she said. Her voice was not quite steady. "You can come in." He wiped his shoes on the mat, though she had not asked him to, and he did not spread himself into the room the way men did. He looked at the second-hand furniture and the tin-marked studio and the narrow bed and the window that faced a brick wall, and she braced herself for pity or for the gentle, terrible offer to move her somewhere better, and it never came. What he said instead quietly was, "It's yours. All of it. I can see that it's yours." As though that were the highest thing a room could possibly be. They built a life in the cracks of those evenings without ever daring to call it that. One night she sewed Runa a small felt star out of scraps, a lopsided 5-pointed thing, one arm longer than the others, meant to be pinned to the child's collar, something of her own to close her hand around when the fear came. Casimir watched her stitch it and remarked that a woman with her hands could surely make the points even. "I could," Zora said, "but then she'd be afraid to touch it. Perfect things frighten people. They decide that if they hold the thing too hard they'll ruin it, and being afraid to ruin a thing is a kind of not having it at all." She bit off the thread. "Crooked things you can love with your whole fist. That's the only kind worth giving a child who has already lost everything." She pinned it to Runa's collar the next morning, and the child pressed it flat against her chest with her palm, and did not take it off for weeks. And in the end, it was Runa who moved the whole fragile thing from arrangement into something that had no safe name. Zora had begun keeping a spare set of the child's things at the flat, for the afternoons Runa spent there while the hotel was being searched, or the family had business elsewhere. She woke one morning at 5 to a small sound in her kitchen and lay rigid in the dark, her whole body flooding with the old fear, certain for one gutted second that Miron had found her at last, that he was standing in her kitchen with that patient, reasonable smile, waiting to explain why the lock had never really been hers. Then the sound came again. A drawer sliding, a soft rustle of paper. Zora crept to the kitchen doorway and found Runa standing on a chair at the counter in the gray pre-dawn light, working steadily through half a loaf of yesterday's bread, crumbs scattered down her nightgown and across the floor. The silent child who screamed when Zora so much as walked toward a door had, at 5 in the morning, let herself out of the guest cot and crossed a strange, dark flat alone, because somewhere in those weeks, Zora's kitchen had become the safest place she knew. Runa went rigid, caught, the bread halfway to her mouth, her eyes huge. Zora looked at the crumbs, and the chair dragged to the counter, and the enormous silent question sitting in the child's face. Am I in trouble? Is the safe thing about to turn unsafe? Is this where it all goes wrong? And she felt her eyes sting, and did the only right thing there was to do. She reached up and took down a second plate. You could have woken me, she said, buttering bread for the two of them in the half-dark. But I'm glad you came down. You're always allowed to come. That is exactly what a safe kitchen is for. Runa climbed down off the chair and, for the first time, of her own accord, no frame, no dance, no coaxing, no held-out hand, walked across the kitchen and leaned her whole small weight against Zora's side, and stayed there, warm and quiet, while the bread went cold on the plate. When Casimir arrived at 7, Zora told him about the bread at 5 o'clock, and watched the most dangerous man in Vienna lower himself into a chair at her chipped kitchen table and put his face in his hands, not from grief, this time, and hold it there a while. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wet and his voice had gone to pieces. She crossed a dark flat, he said, alone, on her own 2 feet, for toast, in your kitchen. And Zora said gently, she crossed a dark flat because she wasn't afraid, and neither of them said aloud the rest of it, that none of the 3 of them had been afraid lately, and that this was somehow the most frightening thing of all, because a person only learns to fear losing what they have finally allowed themselves to hold. Dr. Leander Krantz arrived in the 6th week, and Casimir Dragonov discovered he was capable of jealousy. Krantz was the child psychologist the family had retained a year before, kind, gifted, a man who knelt to Runa's level without making it a performance, and who, after one afternoon watching Zora work, told her, "You should have trained in this. You see things it took me a decade to learn to see." He touched her elbow lightly as they bent over Runa's drawings and made her laugh twice, and that was the exact moment Casimir came through the door. Kranz's hand was already gone from her elbow, but Casimir had seen it, and his attention settled on the doctor with the flat, unblinking focus that made grown men reconsider their choices. "Are you finished?" he said. It was not a question about the examination. "We began 10 minutes ago," said Kranz, oblivious. "The child tires." "The child," Zora said mildly, "is asleep on my feet." Runa was drowsing against her ankles with the felt star fisted in one hand. "Are you in a hurry, Herr Dragonov?" "No." "Then why do you sound like someone rearranged your furniture?" Kranz developed a sudden fascination with his notes and left quickly. And later, walking the sleeping child to the car, Zora let Casimir carry Runa's coat and did not tell him she had already declined the doctor's dinner invitation that morning, because letting him wonder was, she was learning, its own small pleasure. The Varenne held its winter charity ball 3 weeks later, the mirrored ballroom lit like the inside of a jewel. Zora set aside a quiet room off the floor for Runa, who was better now, but not ready for 100 strangers and an orchestra, and told herself she would spend the night where she always did. At the edges, in the safe dark, where no one watched. Adeline Draxler had other plans. She found Zora near the terrace doors, resplendent in ice blue. "The famous coat girl," she said, loud enough to turn heads. "How novel it must be, to matter for a season." Her smile was a scalpel. "But I do wonder, can you actually dance, or only shuffle a broken child around a nursery?" She lifted her voice, gathering an audience the way a fire gathers air. "Show us. One dance here, now, in front of everyone, or admit you are exactly what I said. A girl who looks like a dancer in the dark and comes apart in the light." And there it was again, the old cruelty reaching her through a stranger, Miran's words in Adeline's mouth. You come apart in the light, Zora. You were only ever any good when no one was looking, and a dancer no one can look at is no dancer at all. Every eye on the terrace turned to her. Her hands went cold, the floor seemed to tilt, and for one horrible second, she was 23 again in a competition hall in Prague, frozen mid-figure while the music went on without her. And she felt the old paralysis climb her spine, and thought, she's right. I'll freeze. I'll prove her right. A small hand slipped into hers. Runa had come. She had left the quiet room and crossed the blazing ballroom, through a forest of strangers' legs, into the very center of the thing she feared most. Because from the doorway she had seen Zora's hands begin to shake, and she had come the way Zora once crossed a marble floor for a stranger, to stand between the one who mattered and the danger. Runa looked up at her, and lifted her other hand into the shape of a frame, and the trembling in Zora's hands simply stopped, because this was the thing Adeline and Miran had never understood. Zora's hands did not shake when someone needed her. They only shook when she believed the watching was the point, and it never was. You want to see me dance? Zora said, and her voice did not shake either. She knelt, took Runa's small hands into the frame, rose, and looked Adeline full in the face. Then watch this. And she danced with a 6-year-old in the center of the mirrored ballroom. A slow, plain box step, the child's feet sometimes on top of her shoes, both of them turning under the great chandeliers while 100 of the most important people in Vienna went silent and still. Runa hummed the 4 notes aloud, the first sound most of the room had heard her make. And Zora turned her gently through the light, holding the frame, never pulling, never once taking her eyes off the child's face. When the music ended, no one laughed. Zora looked at Adeline. I used to believe I was only a dancer in the dark, she said, for the whole terrace to hear. That the moment anyone watched, I would shatter. Someone taught me to believe it. He was wrong, and so are you. I don't shake because I'm watched. I shake when I forget who I'm dancing for. She rested a hand on Runa's dark head. So keep watching my feet, hoping they'll fail. I'll keep watching the person who needs me. One of us is going to have a much better evening. Adeline flushed a deep red and had no answer, because there was not one. Casimir had said nothing through all of it. Zora found him afterward in the quiet corridor outside the library and understood from his face that he had stood at the back and let her have the whole of it. Had not swept in to silence Adeline, though a single word would have done it, because he had learned the difference between rescuing someone and giving them the floor. You could have stopped her, Zora said. Yes. Why didn't you? Because you didn't need stopping. You needed room. So I gave you room. A pause. Did you see me? At the back? Yes. I danced better because you were there. I don't know what to do with that. I might, he said, very low, and did not move toward her, because he had learned that too, to hold the frame and wait. And so it was Zora who closed the distance and kissed him. He went utterly still, the way he had that first night on the ballroom floor. His hands stayed at his sides, and she drew back just far enough to whisper the permission he was waiting for and would never take without. You can hold me. I'm asking you to. One hand came to the small of her back. The frame, the promise. The other rose to her face, and the most feared man in Vienna kissed the coat girl slowly, carefully, as though she were something being built rather than something being taken. The doctor, he murmured against her hair, is going to be disappointed. Zora laughed unsteadily. You're still jealous. Violently, I'm managing it. A pause. Poorly. Their first real closeness happened not in a bedroom but on New Year's Eve, on the floor of the practice room, over a screaming child. The fireworks began at midnight over the Danube, And Runa did not know they were fireworks. She knew only the sound, the crack and boom rolling up through the old hotel's bones. And to the child it was not celebration. It was the night it all came apart, 11 months ago. The noise and the fear, and the thing she had seen from the top of the stairs that took her voice and never gave it back. They found her under the practice room piano, hands clamped over her ears, mouth open around a scream that made no sound at all, which was somehow worse than any scream Zora had ever heard. Casimir reached her first and did what he had done all his life, tried to command the fear into order. Runa. Runa. You're safe. Look at me. And the child only pressed harder into the corner, because his voice, sharp now with his own terror, had become one more loud thing. Stop. Zora caught his arm. You're making the room louder. She can't tell you apart from the sky. Another boom rolled across the water. Runa flinched into the wall. Sit down. On the floor. Slowly. I don't sit on floors while she... Sit down, Casimir. No one told Casimir Dragonov to sit. She watched the refusal move through his whole body. The reflex of a man who had survived by never lowering himself in a dangerous room, then watched him choose her over it and sink to the floor. Now put your hand flat on the floor, she said, sinking down on the child's other side, leaving space so Runa was penned by nothing. Not on her. On the floor, where she can see it isn't reaching for her. She laid her own hand flat. Casimir laid his beside it. And Zora began to hum the 4 notes, the frame, the safe sound, and to breathe, on purpose, slow and deep, so slow it was almost a dare. She'll borrow it, Zora murmured. Not yet, but she will. Frightened things take their rhythm from the calmest thing in the room. So we have to be that, especially when we're not. Another firework broke over the city. She did not flinch. She hummed. She breathed. Beside her, she felt Casimir drag his own galloping heart down to match hers by sheer will, because she had asked him to. Slowly, so slowly, Runa's hands came down from her ears. Her breath, which had been sawing, began to lengthen. She crept out from under the piano on hands and knees, into the open space between them, and looked from one flat still hand to the other. Now, Zora whispered. She laid her hand lightly on the child's back. After a moment, his settled beside hers, and they knelt there over Runa with their hands nearly touching across her small spine, breathing her down from the ceiling, while the sky broke and glittered over the Danube and did not, this time, take anything away. The fireworks faded toward 1 in the morning. Runa fell asleep between them with the felt star crushed in her fist, and neither of them moved, their hands side by side on the child's back, fingers just overlapping. Who does this for you? Casimir said into the quiet. What? This. Who sits on the floor with you when the sky comes apart? You do it for her. You did it for me. In a ballroom. Before you knew my name. Who has ever done it for you? Zora opened her mouth to make it a joke. Nothing came. Nobody, she said, and the word was too honest, and it sat there. People mostly wait for me to drop something. That's the version of me they know. Then they were watching the wrong moment. For years. A pause. His name. Since you keep not telling me. She looked at the child instead of at him. Miron. We danced together. We were good. He was brilliant. And I made him look brilliant. And I did not understand for a long time that a partnership on the floor can be a cage off it. In the studio, he learned that the way to keep me small was to wait. To stand behind me and wait for the one wrong step, then explain to the room, so kindly, that I'd broken the frame again. Her voice thinned. Do it enough times and your hands shake before the music even starts. I stopped being able to dance in front of anyone, and I stayed 4 more years, because leaving felt like admitting he'd been right. That I couldn't manage a floor? or a life, without him behind me pointing out the fall. Casimir's jaw was a hard line. And now. She looked around the practice room, the warped board, the spotted mirrors, the sleeping child, the man in his ruined evening clothes on the floor. Now I think I was managing all of it, she said. Him included. He was just the heaviest thing I carried, and I'd started to believe the weight was me. The city went quiet. Everyone I have ever known, Casimir said finally, met me after my name meant be careful. They calculate me. Every word, every kindness, every knife. Except two people. My brother. And her. He looked at the sleeping child. My brother knew me before there was anything to fear. When I was only his older brother, who could not protect him from our father, and later from the world I built. 11 months ago, that world reached them. I lost my brother and his wife in a single night, and this child was in the house, at the top of the stairs, and saw more than any child ever should. She has not said a word since. Every specialist in Europe told me the door was shut for good. And then a coat girl danced with the air until she chose to cross the floor. You gave me back the only piece of him that is left. He turned his hand over, palm up, an offering. Teach me the other language, the one where I hold the frame and wait. Zora put her hand in his. Over the sleeping child in the ruins of New Year's Eve, Casimir Dragonov lifted her fingers to his mouth and kissed her knuckles. Once, like a man making a vow he did not have the words for. Nothing else happened that night. It was enough. For 6 weeks, Zora let herself believe that happiness could arrive quietly and simply stay. Casimir conducted his business the way he always had, in rooms she never entered, through calls he took at the window with his back to her, and his voice gone flat and foreign. She did not ask. He never told. The same border ran down the middle of their life, and for 6 weeks it kept to its own side of the practice room door. Everywhere else, he softened. He learned to knock even when the door stood open. He learned to ask before he changed a thing in her flat, and when he forgot, he still, sometimes, forgot. Arriving with a plumber already summoned for a tap she had said nothing about, she reminded him, and he stopped and apologized, and it moved her every time. He built Runa a low bar along one wall of the nursery so the child could work her balance. He learned to make the potato soup himself, badly, and was absurdly proud of it. Runa hummed more now, and once, only once, in her sleep, murmured something that might have been a word, and the two of them sat up half the night over the sleeping child, hardly breathing, waiting to hear if it would come again. Their kisses stayed slow and chosen, always at the door, always with the asking. He did not stay the night. She was not ready to make her flat a place where a man's things crept in and quietly replaced her own. She had lived that erasure once, and he understood without being told and never pushed, and the not pushing was its own kind of love. The tin-marked studio grew heavier. She had begun to say the word aloud. She had even, God help her, looked at an empty shopfront 2 streets over, with good light and a floor that could be sprung, and let herself imagine it. Then his world remembered she existed. It was Nandor who brought the envelope, on an ordinary Tuesday, his face wrong in a way that dropped her stomach before a word was spoken. Casimir opened it at the window. Inside was a single photograph. It was Zora and Runa, on the pavement outside her flat, the child's hand in hers, both of them laughing at something out of frame. It had been taken from across the street, with a long lens, on a day she could not even remember. Which was the worst part, that it could have been any day that someone had been close enough on any day. On the back, in careful block capitals, a soft new leash for such a hard man. We know where she sleeps. We know the child. Casimir read it once. His face did not change, which was how she knew it was very bad. Someone's watching you, she said quietly. The words from the ballroom, from the very beginning, come all the way around. Still. No, Casimir said, and his voice had gone to the flat foreign register she only ever heard through windows. Not me. He looked at her, and at the photograph. You. By the time she came back from the market the next afternoon, her life had been moved without her. She climbed the 4 flights, and her key turned in a lock that was hers, and the flat beyond it was empty. Not robbed. Emptied. Carefully. Completely. Her clothes gone from the wardrobe, her grandmother's soup pot gone from its hook, the tin-marked studio gone from the shelf. Even the crooked things, the second-hand chair, the chipped mug, gone, as if she had never lived there, as if the room had exhaled her. There was a car at the curb when she ran back down, and Nandor, who would not meet her eyes, and a 20-minute drive to the Draganov compound. All walls and cameras and men with careful hands. On the 3rd floor, behind a guarded door, was a suite someone had built to look like her life. They had tried, and it made it worse. Her books stood on a shelf in the wrong order. Her grandmother's dented pot sat beside a range she had never cooked on, like a peasant at a state dinner. The tin-marked studio stood next to an orchid in a crystal vase, as though someone had taken an inventory of her soul, reassembled it from a list, and gotten every single thing wrong. Casimir was waiting at the window. "What is this?" Zora said, very quietly. "You will both stay here until it is handled. It is the only place I can guarantee. You moved my life, every object I own, into a fortress, without asking me. There was nothing to ask." He turned. He believed it. She could see he believed it. And that was the horror of it. "Someone photographed you and my brother's child and wrote we know where she sleeps. I am not going to debate the safety of a flat above a shop with a lock a child could pick." By noon, I had decided. By 4, it was done. You are safe. She is safe. That is the entire calculation. "For whom?" Zora said. "For you." "No." She was shaking, but not the old way, not the watched hand's tremor. This was colder and steadier. "Safe for me would have been you standing in my kitchen, saying someone found us. Here is what I know, what you want to do. This is safe for you. You did not protect me. You filed me." She looked around the room. "You copied my whole life from a list because you could not bear to leave me anywhere your hand couldn't reach. You are alive to be angry about it." His voice was rising now, the flat register cracking. "I have ruined men for less than that photograph. I moved you because the alternative is a tomorrow I will not survive. I will not survive opening an envelope with a different photograph inside it. You watched me give a terrified child a choice every day for 2 months." She cut across him, and he stopped. "You watched me hold a frame and wait instead of grabbing her, even when waiting was agony. You said, 'Teach me the one where I hold the frame and wait.'" Her eyes were burning. "And the first time it was your fear on the line, you threw all of it away and dragged me across the city without a word. You are not holding the frame, Casimir. You are Miron in a better coat." The name landed like a slap. His face went white. "Do not," he said, low and dangerous, "compare me to that man. Then don't do what he did with more expensive furniture." She held his eyes. "He also only ever wanted to keep me safe. That is what they all say. I'm only trying to protect you. Men love that sentence. It makes a cage sound like an act of love." He took my keys, decided who I saw, moved into my life object by object until no room was mine, and explained every time so patiently that his fear was special, his judgment better. Every controlling man who ever lived believed his was the one cage that was really a kindness. His hands had closed at his sides. She saw the anger move through him, the kind men stepped back from. and her body, traitor to the last, braced the way it had learned to in another life. And Casimir saw her flinch, and it stopped him cold. He looked at his own fists, at her braced shoulders and lifted arm. The animal readiness he had put there in 10 seconds, and the anger drained from his face and left something far worse behind. "You are frightened of me," he said, "right now, in this room." "I'm frightened of how easily you decided my no did not matter," Zora said, and her voice broke on it. "You never even bothered to hear it. You just decided you knew better and moved the world. That is the thing I ran from, that exact thing. And I found it again in the one man I let all the way in." Silence. Runa, drawn by the raised voices, appeared in the doorway and looked between them, one hand already going to the felt star at her collar. "What do you want?" Casimir said at last. Wrecked, quiet. "My life back where it was, in the flat. With the lock that's mine. The flat isn't safe. Then I'll leave the flat, and the compound, and you, and find a third place, and it will be mine." She watched that land. "I am ending this. All of it. Zora, Runa needs you. You can't just—" He heard it as it left his mouth, the regret crashing over his face a half-second too late, the way she always felt his intentions a half-second early. "Don't," Zora whispered. "Don't you dare use her as a leash. I spent 2 months teaching that child that love does not tie you to the floor. Do not make me prove the same lesson to you." Casimir looked as though she had run him through. "You are right," he said instantly, hoarsely. "I should not have said it. It was the cruelest thing I have ever—" He stopped. He stepped back, and back again, giving her the whole room, the way he had learned to give the child the whole room. It was the only apology his body knew how to make. One driver, no guards, Nandor. He takes you anywhere you say, and leaves the moment you are inside the door. I will not know the address unless you give it to me. I will not contact you. Not once, unless you ask." She looked at Runa in the doorway, and her chest tore open, because leaving him meant leaving the child too, and the child did not yet have the words to understand that going and coming back was different from leaving. She knelt. "Frame," she said softly, and pressed the small hands flat between hers. "The promise, the 4 ounces of trust. You remember what it means. It doesn't break because I walk to a door. It doesn't break across a city. I taught you that, and I meant it. You keep the star. You keep humming. You hold the frame, and you wait, and you will see." Runa's eyes filled. She did not scream this time. Somehow that was worse. Zora packed only what was hers. She left the compound in the back of a black car with the tin-marked studio in her lap, and a driver who would not look at her, and Casimir Dragonov stood in the 3rd-floor window and watched her go, and did not stop her. The single hardest and only truly loving thing he had done in the whole affair. She rented 2 rooms above a bakery on the far side of the river, where the mornings smelled of bread, and the landlady asked no questions about the tin-marked studio, or the woman who sometimes danced alone, late, with no music. It was smaller than the flat, and not as safe as the compound. It was hers, and the lock was hers, and that was the whole of what it needed to be. She took work at Dr. Kranz's practice, not as a patient, as a pair of hands. He made her an offer that was really a door. Work with the frightened ones, and I will sign the hours toward a real qualification, because you are good at this, and the world should let you do it. She spent her mornings on the floors of small, bright rooms, holding frames and waiting, and did not once, before all those watching parents, drop a thing. Casimir did not call. He kept his word with the terrible completeness of a man who had only his word left. He sent exactly 1 message, the morning after she left. She read it in the bakery stairwell and had to sit down. I watched you give a frightened child a choice every day for 2 months and told myself I understood. The first time I was afraid, I took yours. I have no defense. Your belongings are yours. Nothing of mine is among them. I checked twice. Whatever you build it in your own name. I will not contact you again unless you ask. She read it every night for a week. She did not answer. Answering felt like opening the frame, and she was not ready. And the not being ready was itself a choice she was allowed to make. What she did not know, because knowing would have been a leash, was that Runa had stopped humming. The child had gone back toward the wall. Not all the way. The door Zora had opened did not fully shut. But the felt star was clutched to grayness now, and Runa had taken to sitting at the third-floor window, watching the river with the patience of the bereaved. And Casimir, who could have ended his own agony in a moment by sending Zora one photograph of that small waiting figure, did not. He would not turn the child's grief into a weapon aimed at the woman he loved. He had done that once, with a single sentence, and watched it nearly destroy the very thing he was trying to keep. So instead he sat with the child in the evenings on the floor by the window and spoke to the only other person alive who had known him before his name meant be careful. I did what I have always done, he told her once, both of them watching the empty street. I saw a danger, and I made it stop by taking away everyone's choices but mine. Your father used to tell me I would do that until it cost me the one thing I could not buy back. His jaw worked. She told me plainly what she needed, more than once. I heard the words and did not change the thing underneath them. And now there is an empty place at the window where two of you used to be. Runa leaned her head against his arm. He did not grab her. He let her lean. I am trying to learn the waiting. It is the hardest thing anyone has ever asked of me. I am not certain I am fast enough. 6 weeks after Zora left, on a raw gray afternoon, a security door on the compound's east side was left unlatched for 90 seconds during a change of shift. It was long enough. Zora was closing up the bakery rooms at dusk when she heard it. Small, uneven footsteps on the stairs, and then a high, thin, exhausted cry with no words in it. And she opened her door and found Runa on the landing. The child had crossed the entire city. On foot. Alone. 6 years old, in a coat buttoned wrong, one shoe soaked through, having somehow remembered, from a single laughing afternoon on a pavement, the way to the far side of a river she had crossed exactly once. Her small legs were shaking, her face was streaked with cold and tears. And clutched in one fist, held out toward Zora like a password, like a promise being called in, was the crooked felt star. Oh, Zora said, and the word came apart, and she went down on her knees on the landing. Oh, you impossible, ridiculous, brave, brave girl. Runa crashed into her so hard they nearly went over, and Zora wrapped the whole shaking child up, star and wrong-buttoned coat and soaked shoe and all, and held the frame, and rocked her, and felt the small body finally stop bracing. She had the child inside, dry, wrapped in a blanket with warm milk going cold beside her, and had just finished the shaking phone call. She's here. She's safe. Come. When she heard the car in the street below, and knew, the way she had known a stranger meant harm across a ballroom, exactly who had arrived. His footsteps on the stairs were not steady. That, more than anything, told her how frightened he had been. Casimir stopped in the open doorway, rain in his hair, and looked first at the child, confirming with his whole body that she was real and safe, and here, and only then at Zora. He did not come in. He stood on the threshold, the most powerful man in Vienna, close enough to own the building and careful enough not to cross a line he no longer assumed was his. She walked across the city, he said. His voice was destroyed. Alone, in the cold. She has not chosen to go anywhere in her life without being carried, and she walked across the city. To me. Zora said gently. She walked across the city to me. Because I taught her that going and coming back is different from leaving, and she believed me. Her eyes filled. She held the frame, Casimir, the whole way across a river. She learned the lesson better than either of us. He looked at the child asleep now against Zora's side, the star loose in her open hand. And then, he did the only thing there was to do. "May I come in?" he said. And the question traveled through every room they had ever stood in. The flat where he first asked it and meant it. The compound where he took instead of asked and nearly lost everything. This cold, bright landing where he stood now, powerful enough to break the door and humble enough to wait beside it. "Yes," Zora said. "You can come in." He came in quietly and crossed to lower himself to the floor, not beside her, across from her, the child between them, and laid one open hand near Runa's, palm up, and waited until, in her sleep, the small fingers drifted into his. "I thought protection meant taking away every risk," he said low. "It is how I stayed alive. It is how I kept a family alive, until the one time it mattered most. And then it was the very thing that—" He stopped. "I did not understand that safety a person does not choose feels exactly like a cage. You told me. You said it in words. I heard the words and kept the instinct." His eyes came up to hers. "And now I am a man who stands in doorways, waiting to be let in. It is unbearable." A pause. "It is the best thing that has ever happened to me." Zora looked at him across the sleeping child, and the frozen thing in her chest that Miran had put there, and that Casimir had once, terribly, confirmed, began very slowly to thaw. "That's a beginning," she said. He came back the next evening with no guards and no gifts. A man who had finally understood that the gift was the not bringing, and over potato soup. While Runa slept in the next room, they built the terms of the rest of it out loud, one honest line at a time. "I'm not coming back as anyone's employee," Zora said. "Not the child's keeper, not a thing on your payroll. No. If I open the studio, it's in my name, my lease, my floor. You don't buy it." Painfully, Casimir said, "Yes. You can invest, if I ask, and I can pay you back to the last shilling and walk out of your life owing you nothing, and that clause goes in the papers, in ink. I will hate that clause with my whole heart. That's not a no." "No," he admitted. "It is not." He told her, over the second bowl, that the men who had taken the photograph had been found. A rival house testing whether the feared Casimir Dragonov had grown a soft place they could press. He had ended it, he said, and paused so she would understand it mattered, without breaking anyone. Because somewhere in the last months, a coat girl had told him that a man who answers every fear with force is a man still ruled by fear, and her sentences had taken up permanent residence inside his decisions and would not leave. "You are in my head now," he said, almost accusing. "When I reach for the old way, I hear you asking who I am really protecting. It is deeply inconvenient. I have never been less efficient. I have also never, in 6 weeks, opened an envelope afraid of what was inside it, because the thing I was most afraid of losing walked itself across a city back to us." He set down the spoon. "I love you. I need to say it in the room, not through a window." Zora went still. "I loved the way she trusted you before I understood why," he said, and his voice was steady and certain in a way she had never heard it. "Then I loved the way you saw the people my whole life had trained me to walk past. The waiter, the child in the corner, the woman I would have let stand alone in a ballroom and die. I loved that you returned everything I bought and kept the empty tin because it was yours. I loved that you made a room where my name did not walk in before I did." His jaw tightened. "And I loved you badly once, when fear made me take instead of ask, and I moved your life like furniture, and reached for the child to hold you in place. I will carry that. I will not ask you to call it protection. It was not. It was the old thing wearing my face. He turned his hand over on the table, open, an offering, not a grab. I am asking to hold the frame, and wait, for as long as it takes. Zora's eyes were streaming. I love you too. He did not move. Are you certain? No, she said, and watched surprise cross his face, and laughed through the tears. I'm certain I love you. I'm not certain love makes either of us easy. You still want to move the world when you're afraid. I still flinch at raised voices. We are going to be work. I have never once wanted easy, Casimir said. I want true. Easy is what people build who are afraid of what is underneath. 3 months later, Zora signed a lease, in her own name, with a loan from Casimir so riddled with exit clauses he called it a personal insult, on the empty shopfront 2 streets over. She sprang the floor herself. She hung the spotted mirrors. Above the door she painted the name she had carried in a biscuit tin for 3 years. Not her own, in the end, but the truer thing Runa had wordlessly taught her it was for, the open frame, dancing for anyone the floor forgot. Her first student was a boy of 9 who had not let a stranger touch him since a car accident. Her second, a widow of 81 who had not danced since her husband died and paid, over Zora's objections, in walnut cake. Her third, a competition dancer of 25 who had frozen at a championship in front of 3,000 people and never stepped onto a floor since, who wept in the doorway before she took a single step, and whom Zora reached the only way she knew, dancing alone in the light, leaving the frame open and waiting. Runa became the studio's uncrowned queen. She sat in the front corner with the felt star pinned to her collar, and when a new student stood frozen at the edge of the floor, it was often the small silent girl who crossed to them first and offered the frame, teaching, without a single word, the lesson she had learned on the far side of a river. You never pull. You wait. And then, you come. Casimir divided his time between the city he still frightened and the small sprung floor where his name meant nothing. He still led men who paled when he was displeased. But at the studio door, he knocked. He asked before he changed things. When he slipped back into the old certainty, and he still slipped, Zora reminded him, and when he grew defensive, Runa would leave his side and go stand pointedly beside Zora, which Casimir considered the rankest betrayal, and which delighted the child enormously. Adeline Draxler came once, to a charity showcase, and called Zora the coat girl who had stolen the Dragunov household. Runa crossed the room and glared until the woman's smile curdled. She stole nothing, Casimir said evenly. She noticed a wound the rest of us had learned to call silence. And Zora added, holding out a card, and I'm not a coat girl. I run a studio. Rates are on the back. If the light ever gets too bright for you, we take anyone. Adeline did not take the card. Runa stared until she did. On the first warm evening of spring, they held the studio's opening night. The little floor filled with all the wrong people for a ballroom. The boy who flinched. The widow with her cake. The frozen champion who had danced 8 whole bars that week before her hands remembered to shake, and stopped, and danced 8 more. The spotted mirrors held all of them and made none of them a mistake. When the last student had gone, Casimir crossed the empty floor to where Zora stood catching her breath and did a thing he had never done in his life. He held out his hand, lifted it into the shape of a frame, and asked, "Dance with me," he said. "Not to save my life, not to fool anyone watching, just—" His certainty faltered, and she loved him for the faltering. "I have never once danced because I wanted to. I would like the first time to be with you." Zora looked at his open hand, at the man who could command half the city standing in the middle of her small floor, actually waiting for permission he would never take without. Someone's watching, you know, she said softly. He glanced toward the corner where Runa sat with the felt star, watching the two of them with her whole solemn heart. Let her watch, Casimir said. I want a witness. Zora stepped into the frame. He did not pull her. He never would again. He offered the shape, and she fell into it because she chose to. And the most feared man in Vienna waltzed slowly around a sprung floor in a shop front with the woman who had once dragged him across a ballroom to keep him breathing. And this time, nothing was hunting either of them, and the only eyes in the room belonged to a child. And there was nothing in the whole turning world to be afraid of. They had gone perhaps half a turn when the small voice came from the corner. It was rusty from more than a year of silence, barely more than a breath. But it was a word. The first Runa Dragonov had spoken since the night at the top of the stairs. And it fell into the quiet studio like a stone into still water, and stopped them both dead in the middle of the floor. Again, Runa said. Zora's hand flew to her mouth. Casimir went white, then luminous, and it was the only time she ever saw him weep openly, standing in the middle of a dance floor with his hand still in hers, undone by a single ordinary word from a child asking for the good thing to keep going. He looked at Zora. Zora looked at him. Neither could speak. So Runa said it again herself, louder, the way children do when the adults have plainly failed to understand. One small hand pressed flat over the crooked star at her collar, her tear-streaked face lit like the whole of spring. Again. And they did. Zora Havlin had crossed a ballroom for a stranger to keep him alive. Casimir Dragonov had taken far longer to learn the harder thing, that you keep no one alive by holding them, that the only love that lasts is the kind you offer with an open hand and wait to have accepted. But on a small sprung floor, in the light, he had once believed she would shatter in, with a child saying again, again, Casimir Dragonov finally understood the whole of it. You never pull a partner. You hold the frame. You wait. And you dance every single time they choose to come.